Hi there, this is Power in Politics. I'm David Cochrane in Ottawa, where Mark Carney's government has just tabled its spring economic update. And it shows an economy that's on somewhat more stable footing, but also increasingly at risk of stumbling as the world grows more dangerous and unpredictable.
Canada is resilient. Canada is resourceful. Canadians are resourceful people. So together, we can chart a path forward to the fog of uncertainty, because Canada has what the world wants and increasingly needs.
Since the fall budget, the government's bottom line has actually improved. The deficit shrank by $11 billion this year to about $67 billion. But there is still no projected path back to anywhere close to balance in the years ahead. Now, that smaller deficit is thanks to a growing economy. But now that growth is slow, but it's better than expected in the face of U.S. tariffs. As a result, the government took in more revenue than expected, a windfall of $60 billion since November, so the government had some room to spend. Today's economic update includes $37.5 billion in new measures. One of the biggest moves announced is a plan to create more skilled workers. The government aims to recruit, train, and hire up to 100,000 skilled trades workers. That'll cost $6 billion, and included in that is up to $10,000 in income support for each apprentice. Other measures include the Sovereign Wealth Fund, announced yesterday, a plan to cut CPP premiums, and streamline the disability tax credit. There's also $755 million towards sports facilities and programs, and a new financial crimes agency. Now, just moments ago in the House of Commons, Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre reacted to this fiscal update, calling it a credit card budget.
On this day, as the Prime Minister congratulates himself for putting an 11th Liberal budget on the national credit card and tells Canadians that affordability is the best it's been in a decade, let us remember that his illusions are not reality.
Okay, we're going to get some more reaction from the Conservatives now. I'm joined by Adam Chambers. He is the party's critic for international trade. Adam Chambers, good to see you, sir. Thanks for being here.
Pleasure to be here with you again, David.
So $37.5 billion in new spending on new measures. There's another $17.5 billion that stacks on top of that. That's an extension of measures that were going to expire. So $60 billion in revenue, $55 billion really in new spending. What do you make of the picture that was laid out today by the finance minister?
Well, it's clear. The reason the deficit picture is slightly better than it was in November was because their government is actually receiving higher personal and corporate tax revenues than what they expected. So, that is flowing to the bottom line. The other measures are really just reallocations of existing spending internally. But again, this budget deficit number is still double what Prime Minister Trudeau's last budget had projected for the years ahead. So the suggestion that...
A lot has changed since Justin Trudeau's last budget, though. Trade war, economic shock in the Middle East. There's a lot of...
Indeed, but there's certainly not a revenue problem at the Government of Canada. The Government of Canada the government is still posting strong revenues, stronger than they expected. This government is electing to spend some and put some of them back to the bottom line. But they had padded the numbers in November to make it look like the deficit was a bit bigger than they expected. So, they're slightly jumping over a low bar that they set for themselves. Right. But the truth is, we still believe, you look at debt service costs. Debt service costs are going from about $55 billion a year to $80 billion in just a few short years. That's a significant increase, more than we collect on GST, and more certainly than we spend on healthcare, send to provinces to deliver healthcare in the country.
I just want to signal to people listening at home, hearing a lot of background noise. We're all kind of jammed in here in the foyer of the House of Commons, and some people don't have inside voices. And that is what you're hearing. There's people shouting on either side of us. So we're going to try to talk at a normal tone of voice here if we can. But look, you're right that the spending is up and the revenue is up. But the needs are also greater because of the shock last year of the trade disruption, and now the energy, the supply shock, and the oil shock caused by what's happening in the Middle East. Shock stacked on top of shock because of the deliberate actions of the United States.
Well, there's no question there are external events that are affecting the domestic economy here, but let's remember, again, you point back to the revenues, the economy's still doing somewhat okay, but I would say there's worrying signs on the horizon. Sure. I think the government should be tightening its belt much further in order to prepare for potential additional downside risks. I mean, if you look at the way that they project downside economic scenarios, it could be a fairly negative picture. And there's some economic indicators that are suggesting that it's not as rosy as a picture as the government is trying to portray.
Well, there's one scenario. I want to go through a couple of measures, but just on that macro picture, right? Look, it's a mix of prudence and pessimism in that they project 1.1% GDP growth this year, which is based on the consensus of private sector forecasters. So this is the model we use in this country. IMF says it should be higher than that. They use a $73 barrel of oil. It's likely going to be higher than that. Both things could be more money. But you look at the projections of if this persists in the Middle East, you're looking at growth being cut in half. You're looking at the possibility of a global recession. So how do you calibrate with any precision in all of that?
Well, I think you've just identified some serious and significant downside risks, not just for revenue, but for the economy in general.
Yeah.
If that is the case, the government should not be increasing its spending. It should be reducing its spending, preparing or setting aside, a rainy day fund instead of setting up, another agency, the Canada Sovereign Wealth Fund, or the so-called Sovereign Wealth Fund. That's now the 13th agency that Prime Minister Carney has started. So I think, you've identified there are risks on the horizon. We're suggesting that we should not be spending going into those risks.
So the Sovereign Wealth Fund is going to be seeded over the next 3 years. So just set that aside for a second because that's not part of the deficit that built up to today. So there's money there to help apprenticeships to get a $10,000 subsidy to employers for wages, $400 per week for people in the skilled trades when they're doing their mandatory education component, and $5,000 bonus if you complete your training because a lot of people drop out throughout the process. That's $6 billion over 5 years. That seems like a valuable thing to do if you're going to try to double home building and grow the economy. So I know Mr. Poilievre pointed to that $31 billion number that was in the last Justin Trudeau number. Why that number? I mean, what do you get rid of? What does that do to fundamentally change the picture on an economy that's soon going to be worth $4 trillion? Getting a deficit down to $31 billion? What do you throw overboard there?
Well, again, if risks are on the horizon, I think we should be tightening our belt. That's not to take away from some measures in here that might be okay. The apprentices, this is a support that Conservatives have called for some time. In fact, we had a private members bill to support apprentices as well. But there are still, you look at some big ticket items. Almost $25 billion on outsourced professional services contracts and consultants.
They're doing a review of that to shrink it, which I know is something you have been calling for quite some time.
They're saying that they're doing a review of it to shrink it, but David, I'll believe it when I see it. There's also tens of billions of dollars for corporate welfare. There are large pots of money that I think are opportunities with which the government should be significantly tightening its belt, especially as they're going to the public service and saying, hey, we're actually going to have less work for you to do. Mm-hmm. You shouldn't also then be outsourcing record amounts of work every single year, which is what that professional service contract $25 billion is.
Well, there's a couple of things not in this budget, too, in that we don't yet know what the consequence of the comprehensive expenditure review will be because that process is still ongoing. So we don't know what the savings will be on that side of it. We also don't have booked the next big tranche of defense spending, right? So they may get a revenue windfall through savings and better economic performance, but if you're going to buy submarines and other things, there's billions more in capital that has to go on the book there. Now, they're still projecting a declining deficit over time, knowing those caveats are out there, and a deficit to GDP ratio. Do you think this is still what the IMF calls the best fiscal picture in the G7?
Well, certainly respect the folks at the IMF, but you have to look at total government debt in this country because most other countries that we're compared to don't have the same level of sub-sovereign debt. These are the provincial
provinces have big debts.
Provinces'
right?
debt, so they have big debts too. But I would also say, we have to think about if we're going to run into some economic challenges, the government should be tightening its belt significantly. If you look at even the government's now new fiscal anchor, which is, I think, the deficit to the GDP, if they're in the downside scenario, that fiscal anchor is likely broken. And you'll recall the last fiscal anchor, the debt to GDP ratio, is now actually, they said was supposed to go down every year, is actually going up every year for the next 3 years. So, these are the things with which we should be worried about. And frankly, if Prime Minister Trudeau was still the Prime Minister today running deficits this size, I don't think we would be saying that he has moved to the right.
No, and that's fair enough, but I mean, it's a difference in what the focus is, I suppose. They are trying to jolt economic activity, though we still have flat kind of projections in the out years, right? But I mean, what do you throw overboard here? Is it just shrinking the size of the civil service overall? Do you cut back on entitlements? Like, what do you do here to get it down to those numbers? Because Sahir Khan and others were talking about how the economic output is not a capacity. There's only so much interest rates can do. You need to spend as a government to kind of drive the economic activity, and if you pull back, you risk killing your growth even more.
Yeah, well, again, professional services contracts, they have to be digging in there. That's $25 billion. The corporate welfare and subsidies, there's $3 billion for climate finance here. I mean, there's probably some things that this Prime Minister has suggested that probably don't need to get done. Why are we're spending $11 million to host the pension summit in November. They're spending in September, they're spending another $6 million to set up the office for the Sovereign Wealth Fund, which will then set up the permanent office. I mean, there's lots of money kind of sloshing around. And again, this climate finance fund, I don't think is going to be meaningful economic jolt for the country that they're hoping for.
Maybe not, but there's also some extensions of tax credits to oil companies in here that people will see as fossil fuel subsidies that the other side of the aisle may not like as much. But we're out of time. Adam Chambers, always appreciate it. Adam Chambers, he is the Conservative Party critic for international trade. Appreciate it, sir.
Thanks, David.
All right, good inside voice chat there. NDP leader Avi Lewis says today's update didn't go far enough to ease affordability concerns for everyday Canadians. Have a listen.
I think today was the Liberal government had a big opportunity today to actually address the everyday emergency of the crisis of the cost of living for Canadians with concrete measures, new programs that would actually make people's everyday lives better. It didn't do that.
All right, NDP leader Avi Lewis joins me now here in the foyer of the House of Commons.
From a clip of me to me?
I know. It's just,
is this broadcast standard, David?
Well,
the set's falling apart.
The FCC will investigate us.
The finance minister and I are saving the CBC set together. This is surreal.
But you said there in that clip that they had a big opportunity to address the affordability concerns. You said they fell short. I mean, where do you think they fell short here?
Oh, on so many measures. I don't want to disrupt this moment of panel unanimity about the disability tax credit and making it easier. My family went through trying to apply for it for our kiddo, and it took us months. And we have a lot of privilege and capacity. It's made it a little bit easier, but the disability benefit in Canada is $200 a month.
Yeah.
Legislated poverty for countless Canadians who live with disabilities. If you get disability activists reacting to this change, they'll be okay. It was fiddling around the edges.
Yeah, it could be this is good, but.
There's big money for some things, and there's no money on the table for addressing the crisis that people are in, the skyrocketing cost of groceries, unaffordable housing and rent and everything else. But we've got $25 billion to put in a sovereign wealth fund where we're going to subsidize profitable projects, as opposed to the Norwegian example, which is cited by the Prime Minister and the Finance Minister, which is in fact, let's be really specific here, the opposite of what we're doing.
Well,
in Norway,
it's a different model, unitary
it's a complete
state against the oil money.
No, hang on, it's the opposite, David. It's the opposite. They've cited the Norwegian model, but they're doing the opposite. Norway has a publicly owned oil and gas company. Generations of appropriate taxation build a $2.2 trillion sovereign wealth fund. They have a rock-solid welfare state. Every new vehicle in Norway just about is an electric vehicle. They're making a transition beyond fossil fuels. They use the profits of a finite resource to subsidize the public good. We are putting public money to subsidize profitable corporations, including if they use this vehicle to de-risk, quote unquote, i.e. subsidize with public dollars, a new oil and gas pipeline. You will really have the opposite of Norway if that's the case.
Look, we don't know. I mean, certainly that has the potential. And Norway is a different structure, where it is one level of government, and you don't share the revenue with the provinces.
Yes, sure, there's a big difference there.
There's a bunch of differences there in the structures. But in terms of what you wanted to see or felt could have been here today in the update on the affordability side, the Sovereign Wealth Fund's years project, what's missing from this today?
I mean, we've seen a tax cut for gas, right? Which we said at the moment would be absorbed by price gouging corporations instantly. It's now $1.80 today, average gas price per liter in Toronto. Where is this big tax cut? It's taken billions of dollars from public revenue for arguably no benefit to Canadians. You have the same thing with a lot of these measures, which are basically putting money into vehicles where to capitalize, as the Prime Minister likes to say, private investment.
What can the government do other than take the excise tax off fuel? Because it is a global commodity shock caused by the war between the U.S. and Iran.
About this at length. Let's talk about other measures. Can I host the show now, or does only the Finance Minister get to do that? No, but seriously, we called for an end to surveillance pricing, which is this creepy new practice, which we didn't see in the spring economic update. We said, please enforce the Canada Health Act. Canadians are paying more for health care because of privatization of health care. MRIs that people are going to private providers.
Like that's not a surveillance pricing thing. It's posted. You see it there. You go in. It's fixed when you fill up your car.
There isn't a single new revenue measure in this entire spring economic update to actually capture some of the excess profits from the oil price shock. Oil and gas companies in Canada forecast to make $90 billion in excess windfall profits this year alone from this war in Iran. And where is the windfall profit tax? During COVID, even Chrystia Freeland put a 15% one-time excess windfall profit tax on the banks. Banks made $70 billion last year in Canada.
Okay, but that's how you get the revenue.
And then you can spend it.
How does that help Canadians
Well, we've
now?
put forward a modest proposal for $300 million, $350 to launch, and $300 million a year for a network of publicly owned grocery stores, which would have unionized labor, which would be modestly subsidized at that level. When you talk about the numbers in this budget, $2.5 billion a year for a gas tax cut that had no measurable impact on Canadians. We're talking about $300 million a year for a network of publicly run grocery stores that would slash the price of food by 30 to 45% for working class Canadians who are sobbing at the checkout in the grocery store right now. If you want to return it to Canadians in a distributive measure like the GST rebate, otherwise known as the grocery and essential rebate, that could be much higher if you taxed profitable corporations appropriately. We can't see fountains of private profit in a moment of economic crisis for Canadians and just say, but we can't touch that money, right? We just can't. We need a government who can go and get that money and give it to the people in order to defray the bonkers cost of living.
There is a body of work, and I'm not advocating for the big oil companies, but there is a body of work that
Are you sure now before you say
No,
this?
but windfall tax profits become difficult to administer because of the accounting practices and exercises, and it essentially forces the government to do, you move things around. Well, this is the challenge.
Me they can't. Look at the beginning of this document, and all of the bankers at the banquet who are the private sector economists on whose forecasts everything is built. Mm-hmm. Where are the trade unions who are building this document? Where are the representatives of working class people who are going through a document like this and actually saying, where are the things that make our lives easier? Where's an ambitious plan for public transit that could be free and functional and get people to work without paying increased prices for public transit? Where are the measures to actually support pharmacare for Canadians, which this government promised? Instead, we've seen Prince Edward Island and Newfoundland say that the feds are not going to extend the national pharmacare plan that we fought for and won in the Supply and Confidence Agreement. So they're walking back things that would benefit Canadians and help them with the cost of medicine, which is not exactly an optional expenditure in a family budget.
Okay, but just a question. Are you saying trade unions should be involved in the economic forecast?
Why not?
Well, because
labor economists are really important for understanding things that bank economists don't see.
But they shifted it out to the private sector forecast because people would accuse governments of fudging the numbers and playing funny. So they are relying on a neutral party as a baseline. If you want to get a neutral society, a neutral party that represents the scope of society, then you should see workers' movements, trade unions, and other organizations represented there, and not just banks, who have an interest in the way that these budgets get written, in the forecasts that underlie them. But why would they do a forecast that is inaccurate or manipulated? No, seriously now.
I'm talking about the orientation and who the Prime Minister sees as his primary constituency. And I'm saying that the private sector forecasts, which are, as you pointed out to the finance minister, somewhat big guesses in a time of massive instability, show the line. It was, we were way up, and then we were way down, and we were way up, and then we were way down in the past couple of years. And then the next few years, we're going gradually
in the
up
last
and up
couple
and up.
of years,
right?
right?
But the next few years don't represent that in these forecasts. I think if you asked a worker, what do you think is going to happen in the next few years? They'd give you a more accurate picture. They'd say total instability, uncertainty. We never know when we wake up in the morning which bomb is going to drop on our economy today. And that should be reflected here.
Okay. Avi Lewis.
I took you somewhere you didn't expect to go,
leader?
did you?
No, well.
The whole set is going to fall apart now. There's going to be an ideological explosion here on the set.
Well, we'll go to Nathan Cullen and see what he has to say, whether he's going to pull the pin out of the ideological grenade or throw himself on it. We'll see where it goes. Avi Lewis, always good to see you. Now, leader of the Bloc Québécois, Yves-François Blanchet, says he had high expectations for today's fiscal update.
Last week, the Prime Minister promised me in the question period that there would be measures to adapt present and acting businesses, not future projects, to the situation, and the update contains absolutely not a word about that. It's much of a show. It's a lot of paper for not much to tell.
Jean-Denis Garand is the finance critic for the Bloc Québécois, and he joins me now. Thanks for getting in there with the able assistance as the Minister of Finance.
Thanks for having me.
Your leader is not happy with what you see here today. Is it all bad, or is there anything good in what we saw?
Well, there's always some good measures, but overall, there was supposed to be an economic update, and there was no real update because the situation changed 2-3 weeks ago. The Trump administration changed the way they account for tariffs. So before, most of our economy was sheltered by CUSMA. It was 85% of our exports that were sheltered. Now, almost 50% of Quebec exports are subjected to tariffs, and there's no new measures for that. So there's not really anything to take care of our industrial fabric in the very short term.
Right. Well, this is the challenge with doing an update like this in a time like this, right? Because you've got to check all your numbers, you've got to translate it into multiple official languages, so you've got to pick a cutoff point at a certain time. So knowing that they had to lock in the projections and lock in the measures, what do they need to do now to support these Quebec industries? So I used to talk to Jean Simard from the aluminum sector last week. He says they've been able to find markets in Europe, right? They've been able to deal with some things. I mean, they seem to have weathered it better than a lot of the other sectors. What do they need to do now?
Well, that's interesting what you're saying, because the finance minister, he says that we've been exporting more in non-U.S. countries, and that's a success. But part of this is our aluminum sector that, at a higher cost, now exports to Europe, and that really is what we call a second best. So we need, for smaller businesses, we need a wage subsidy in the short term, because Quebec is a nation of very small businesses. All those businesses are geared to export to the U.S., and they can't adapt very quick, and they can't hire lobbyists to be heard to be heard here. Now they're going to tell us that they have these new measures for labor training, but that's in the longer run. In the short term, if they want to tell the Trump administration that that Canada is serious at negotiating an agreement and that exporting again, you can't tell all these people working in these companies that are productive, you can't tell them just go do something else, because at some point the Trump administration will target something else.
Right, and look, I'm not trying to be unsympathetic to people affected by this, because you can see the carnage in some key sectors, but when you're running deficits of 66, 65, 63, 57 billion dollars, we took on a lot of debt as a country to do things like you're talking about during COVID. Where's the capacity to do that sort of a thing right now on a national scale? Because if you do it for Quebec industries, there's Sault Ste. Marie, there's Algoma, there's the forestry sector across. There's a lot of people that need help right now.
Well, there's a bit of fiscal room because the deficit was lower than expected, partly because of the natural disaster funds and some tax credits that haven't been claimed because we have less investment than what was expected. And now we give away $10 billion every year in subsidies to oil companies. I don't know how they justified that before, but now when you look at the oil price, no one's gonna cry on what's happening for oil companies. So you have that. It's always a matter of making choices. We have a government that's been elected to make those kind of hard choices to maintain our industrial fabric healthy, and they're not doing it, and that's what they've been elected for.
But what's the cost of something like this? this. Like the deficit is down $11 billion, but there's a whole bunch of other spending that they've done here. I mean, a wage subsidy for small businesses and key sectors going. I mean, that we're talking $11 billion is a one-time improvement to your bottom line. It's not going to cover it. It's going to be bigger than that.
It depends on how you shape it. It depends on how you target it, and it depends how you phase it in. You don't have to do the whole phase in right now. You can do a startup program, and it can be a bunch of programs too. So it depends how it's designed. What we ask the government is to come up with something, and so that we can start a conversation. The minister told in his speech that we had to be constructive. That's what we've been doing. But if you want to dance, you got to be two to dance.
Right, but you know when you look at this, risks remain significant and skewed to the downside. There is some optimism in that growth was better last year. The revenue is better. The risk, though, budget day. There was a real anxiety about what the U.S. was doing just on trade. Now there's a real anxiety on trade and the Middle East, right? So how do you commit to even more than they've done here? Because they have got a lot of spending here when all of that global uncertainty is just hanging over every dollar you spend and every choice you make.
Yeah. Well, and that's going to continue. There's still going to be risks. The world, you said it earlier, it's a more dangerous place. We face a Trump administration that is, to say it politely, troublesome. But this is your job as a federal government to support businesses. This is your job to do it. So, so we were talking about the wage subsidies. We suggest the minister to lend money to in the wood sector, soft lumber wood sector, for example. That's in the long run, that's not a very costly measure. But these people have been subjected to tariffs for a very long time. They
pay a century and a half.
Yeah,
but that's persistent.
Yeah, and the mechanics of it is that they pay money in advance to the U.S. The money is stuck there. They eventually win in court, but in the meantime, they don't have an access to this money, and that's the economic health of our regions that's at stake here. And those are not all very costly measures.
The political dynamic has changed since you and I last spoke on Budget Day. Because back then it was you had to go to your caucus and talk about how you're going to vote on this. None of that drama exists anymore, right?
Well,
What do you think there's drama coming?
Well, I was elected in the last legislature, and we I don't know how many years we spent with an NDP Liberal agreement. So, I mean, the drama wasn't always that acute, but I mean, we've always been doing the same thing. We always propose a real budget platform, electoral campaign. There's no, I can tell Canadians, there's no way I'm going to become a finance minister, and we work on that seriously. Every electoral campaign, every budget, we make proposals because in the end, what we care about is the welfare of Quebecers, and we're always serious in the way we make our proposals.
Okay, they're telling me in my ear, you got to go, because I think you got another one of these to do. Jean-Denis Garand, Bloc Québécois. We always appreciate the time. Thank you, sir.
Bye.